I'm here with Clarence Brahm and Val Harlow, both members of our Refugee Committee. Both of them have been involved with refugees in our church for a while, and I just thought I'd ask them a few questions. Starting with Val, I'm just going to ask, why are you on the Refugee Committee? What makes you enthusiastic about refugees and sponsoring refugees?
I'm on this committee because I was on the last committee, and Dan and Amanda were starting up a refugee committee, and I thought I'd come down and check it out and see what it was all about. And it grabbed me, and here I am.
Cool. And Clarence, for yourself?
Yeah, I've always just kind of had a heart for it, I think. I was involved when our church sponsored the first refugees from Vietnam back in, I think, the early 80s, late 70s. And yeah, it just seems like a really good thing to do. I know at that time our church was, it really was a big thing for our church to do. A lot of people helped out, and I think it was really good for our congregation to be all involved in that process. So, yeah.
Oh, tell us a story about maybe a family or two that have been sponsored in the past by the Terrace CRC.
Well, back in the when the Vietnamese came, they were referred to as boat people by a lot because they left Vietnam by boat, a lot of people. And I think our church sponsored two families, the Dews and the Dieps. But there was also a bunch of young fellows that were sponsored by the government, I think. And three of them lived with the pastor in his basement at the parsonage. And one of them I worked with. His name was Hung Lu. He worked in the body shop with me. He was just a young fellow. And he was a really great artist. He was like a portrait artist. So I think he had a little kiosk in Vietnam, and if you wanted your portrait painted, he would just whip it up in like 20 minutes. I remember one day I was working with him, and we had to haul the garbage because we had this little garbage trailer. We had to haul it to the dump. So we had it all loaded up, and I was driving down the highway, and I noticed in my rearview mirror I was losing a few pieces of garbage, so I thought I should pull over and secure my load. Well, he thought we were at the dump, and as soon as I pulled over, he was in the top of the trailer tossing stuff off the highway into the ditch. So I had to jump on him and tell him this wasn't. So it was pretty funny. But.
Val, talk about the more recent activity of the Refugee Committee. What's been up in the last, say 5 years or so?
In the last 5 years, well, 4 years ago, the Hamadi family came, and I think Dan and Amanda started that. That was a really cool experience. They stayed 11 months, and then they went off to Ottawa, and then we had a little bit of a break here, and now we're pursuing another family that is in a Lebanese refugee camp and is connected to two families here in Terrace.
So tell us a little bit about your experience and why this particular family kind of tugged at your heart and your kind of experience with the Al Qadra 1, 2, and 3 families, if I can say it that way. Tell us about their families and their interconnection.
So I met, I'm going to call them Al Qadra 1 family, just before the Hamadis came, actually. Rama took us grocery shopping, and she had learned enough English to help us figure out what to get for food for these guys. And from that, we've just developed a friendship, and more so over the last couple of years. And she has a sister and a brother-in-law in Lebanon, and they had traveled to the refugee camp together. And that sister and brother-in-law came in November, just this past year, and that was quite an experience for me because I was at the airport, and there were a lot of tears, and.
Pretty emotional, obviously, yeah. So those two families, you've got two brothers married to two sisters, am I correct in that?
Yes.
Al Qadra 1 and Al Qadra 2? Yeah. And then, so you saw that, you experienced that, you saw that firsthand, that reunion. Obviously, you can still feel the emotion of it. So there's another Al Qadra family.
There is.
And you feel motivated even by that experience for this family.
Yes, so the two brothers have another brother in the same camp. Now, I think now it's going on 10 years that they've been in this.
Can you say that again? How long?
10 years.
Okay.
And I think they had one child before they went to the camp. They have 5 children now, and 4 of them have grown up in the refugee camp.
Wow.
So I felt compelled to see if there was enough interest in bringing that brother out of the camp and reuniting him here with his brother.
Well, maybe Val can give a bit of an update on where that's at, the paperwork part.
The paperwork is the hard part. It's a little bit different than the Hamadi family where the government said, here's this family you're having, and they had all the documentation ready and it all came. We specifically chose this family, so I've been having to communicate through the siblings here to try to get information there. And because they just had another child, we had most of the documents in order, so now we have to wait for this other document. And it's been challenging to get those documents. And so we're working with World Renew and we're waiting for those documents so we can actually finally submit our application.
So this third family, our church, our council has supported sponsoring this family. Then kind of in some ways we got to the later February, beginning of March, and COVID hit, and we're kind of feeling like it's on hold a little bit, but still in the meantime, there's thoughts about how in the future this family can come to Canada and we as a church can financially help support them as they make that transition. Clarence, anything else that you want to share about, historically, refugees in our church and our sponsorship of them, or this family, or anything else that you want to share?
So in the late 90s, we sponsored a family from Iraq. They were Iraqi Christians. They were the Neneb families, and they spent a year here. They were the only Arabic-speaking people in Terrace at the time, so I think they were quite lonely. They did leave, and they went to Toronto, and where they've, I think, done quite well. And as they left, they left us this parting gift for our church, and it says in here, presented to the church from the Neneb family, the Holy Bible in Arabic, and it's dated October 12th, 1998. So this is in our church library, so yeah, this is a gift from them.
Cool. So another, Bible story.
Yeah.
I might take up the opportunity to tell the story about that Bible at some point.
Yeah.
Val, anything else that you want to share about this experience for you, or your encouragement to the church through this process?
It's been really fulfilling with the Hamadi family, and then developing a relationship with the El Khadro family, and the anticipation of the third brother, and the whole thing about bringing community in for these people that have come. Just the whole thing is really exciting for me, and I encourage anybody who wants to be part or just come and hear what we have to say at a meeting. They're more than welcome to come and learn about it.
Well, I just want to thank you, Val, and you, Clarence, for spending some time with us, reflecting on the good and rich history of refugee sponsorship in our church, and also anticipating just how not only this is fulfilling to us, but obviously this is part of our calling as disciples of Jesus Christ to do what's right and to do justice and love mercy and walk humbly with our God in various ways in our world. So thank you. I'm here with Selah and Amanda and Daniel Tolstra. Yeah. And mostly I think Daniel and Amanda are going to tell us a little bit about their experience with the Refugee Committee at our church and their work with refugees. So we're glad to have you here. So tell us, Daniel or Amanda first, what was your experience even working with the Refugee Committee at our church?
The Refugee Committee in our church formed back, I want to say, around 2015. And it was at the time when there was the emergence of the what became known as the Syrian refugee crisis, where global refugee numbers were on the rise, and there was this really big global need to find out how to support refugees from the Syrian conflict at that time. And it had not been so long since we had returned from our work in Cambodia. And in that work, we worked with people who were former refugees ourselves, so we felt sympathetic to that. And so the church started asking these questions: is there anything we can do as a church to respond to the refugee crisis? And a committee was formed, which I think is the best church response. Always starts with a committee.
So that was your experience, maybe a little bit more from a distance, but then you met the family and experienced with the family. But tell us a little bit more about your experience with refugees and your work with MCC. What's your role and responsibility again, and then tell us about your work with refugees.
So now we've been working with the Mennonite Central Committee in Zambia, working as the directors of their country office for the last 2 years. And one of the big privileges for us has been able to support projects at a refugee camp in Malawi. And that's been, for us, fascinating because we've been able to have the opportunity to go and visit this camp and meet with individuals that live there, but also meet with groups that are working in the camps to try to improve the lives of the people that are there.
Yeah, so we've both been able to visit this one particular camp several times. And it's a camp that has refugees from all over Eastern Africa. So there's a whole mix of different people speaking different languages, a lot of kids running around. This particular camp was built for 10,000 people, and now 45,000 people live there. So it's definitely crowded. You see a lot of houses just made out of mud or pieces of tin just kind of cobbled together, and so many people in such a small area.
Yeah, one of the things we were talking about before this was how not all refugee camps are the same. In fact, they can look really different depending on the type of refugee camp it is. So refugees camps that emerge right beside a conflict might just be, tents and ramshackle housing, people in sort of desperate situations. But other refugee camps end up being sort of collection facilities for regional conflicts or issues that people might be fleeing. And so this one particular camp that we've had the privilege of working with is one of these regional type of camps. Globally, most refugees live in poor countries adjacent to countries where there's conflict. So Malawi is a very poor country, but I think that the rest of the world is happy to support this camp staying in Malawi so that these problems don't move to the rest of the world. So then Malawi accepts UN funding, etc., to allow this camp to continue to exist. And because of that, it draws people from all over. So people escaping the conflict in Congo, people escaping conflicts in Somalia, people from Burundi, Rwanda, and other places. But what ends up happening, you've got all these people in one place. They have permission to be there. They don't have permission to leave the camp and to be integrated into the larger community. So it ends up being like a prison without cells. So people are in the camp, they're building their lives, they're building houses, and it ends up being almost like a strange micro-city in the middle of the open countryside, which is where the camp is. And so you've got this really dense housing with its own internal economy, which is kind of fascinating. You've got hairdressers and markets and bars and these things, all packed into every little winding corner and alley of this whole complex that hosts 40,000 people. And in the midst of that, there's churches, and there's schools, and there's the sort of official UN-supported schools, but they're woefully inadequate. So then there's also the churches themselves who are running schools and health clinics and all these things.
So I'm thinking also of both your work through MCC and your involvement in the Terrace Christian Reformed Church. This Sunday today we're talking about God as the giver of life. Talk about that in terms of what motivates you both in your work and as Christians in connection with refugees.
For both of us, what struck us about this particular camp that we've been in is that when you first get there, you see there's so many people, and there's something like 12 watering places where people get water for 40,000 people. So there's a lot of dirt, and you know that people aren't able to wash their hands, and the bathroom is a whole nother issue. So you see so much of the sadness at first, but then the more that you're there, the more you see how people are living there. Like, people are building lives, they're having families, I was thinking about Pastor Brad's message, like they're trying to thrive in this new place, in this exile. And then to see the people helping each other, like the churches are trying to do things, but it's not just churches. There's so many people in these places that are working to help their neighbor, to help their families. And there's something so hopeful about that, even though maybe at first it seems really terrible. I think for us there's something really encouraging to see the life that is formed there and the way that people are providing hope to one another, and we feel really honored to be a part of that work.
Yeah. I think the other thing I would add, like in this particular camp, this camp's more than 20 years old now. And so there's people who've been born there that are in their 20s that have never been allowed to leave. And what's kind of remarkable is to think that the boundary of the camp is arbitrary. It's a bureaucratic boundary. There aren't, lions or something keeping them in. It's just rules. So it feels like if it's a human-created problem, there can be creatable solutions. Here's a group of people that are especially in need, and in some ways the solution is relatively simple. If you can find countries for people to be relocated to with communities that will accept them, that's a solution, and that's a solution that we can do. I mean, it's not easy, it's a lot of work, but it's achievable.
Right. Well, I appreciate both. I appreciate our refugee committee in itself and its stance on this, and also I think MCC and its work, our denomination, the Christian Reformed Church. Some people sometimes wonder, well, why don't we just focus on Christians? Let's rescue Christians. And what I really appreciate is the work that's being done as a humanitarian effort. That these are fellow human beings, brothers and sisters in that regard, and so that our work there is equally as important, and maybe even more so as a witness to the world. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think very strongly that nobody can do everything. God calls all of us to help in different ways, and sometimes the level is on very local levels, sometimes it's on international levels, and we all have to respond to that calling. And sometimes that calling is, you have to match the need with the opportunity. And if the opportunity really is to help other Christians, then I think we should respond to that. But if the opportunity is to help people from other walks of faith, as they say, I think we have to respond to that as well. And I think God certainly doesn't put limitations on who he cares about.
Well, Amanda and Daniel, thank you for your time. I don't have anything more to say because you guys have said it all. That's it.
All right. Thank you.
We'll just cut for a second. Do you have a question?
Thank you for putting your hand up. What is it?
I cut my fingernails and now I can't open it.
Oh, you should probably never cut your fingernails again.
Oh.
My fingernails will grow back.
They will grow back.
Do you want to sit with me again, or you want to go inside?
Go inside.
Close the door behind you.
Okay.
There can be creatable solutions. We should have asked her to close the windows too.
Okay, so that they get good stuff.
Well, look, I'm getting a message. Hopefully that doesn't appear on the video.